When Jasmine Crockett used her live stream to expose Tesla's abuses, Pam Bondi fired back, accusing her of inciting anti-government ideology and calling for a federal investigation. What began as a fiery birthday speech quickly escalated into a high-stakes legal and political battle between two powerful women on opposite sides of American justice. As courtroom clashes uncovered hidden alliances, media manipulation, and growing threats to free speech, one question grew impossible to ignore. In today's America, is truth still protected, or is it prosecuted? Stay tuned. This is a story you won't want to miss. It was supposed to be a quiet night. Jasmine Crockett sat in a small, dimly lit studio in Dallas, a single spotlight framing her figure like a courtroom witness about to drop the final blow. Behind her, a simple banner read, "Tesla Takedown." No fireworks, no fanfare. Just one woman and a message she knew would light a fuse under the entire system. The live counter surged, 45,000, 120,000, then over 2 million viewers in under 8 minutes. Her team whispered nervously behind the camera, unsure if she'd actually go through with it. Jasmine adjusted her blazer, pinned with a modest cross, leaned into the mic, and with the steadiest voice in Texas politics said, "This isn't about me. It's about who gets to build America and who keeps burning it down." The room stayed silent, but the comments section exploded. A senator's birthday had just become a declaration of war. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her hands rested flat on the desk, her gaze locked directly into the lens like she was staring through every screen in the country. "I don't want cake. I don't want candles. I want Elon Musk taken down," she said, deliberate, unapologetic, and loaded like a legal indictment. The line cut through the internet like a judge's gavel, slamming down on a billion-dollar empire. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Influencers clipped it in real time. It became the shot heard around the digital world. For Jasmine, it wasn't personal. It was structural. Musk wasn't just a man. He was the symbol of unchecked power, of corporate immunity disguised as innovation. Her words weren't reckless. They were the opening argument in a trial the public didn't even know had begun. And the jury, every American watching, waiting to see who blinked first. The backlash didn't crawl. It roared. Within 30 minutes, Fox News ran a headline: "Radical Crockett calls for takedown of American innovator." By dawn, the hashtags were multiplying like wildfire. ACCUSES takedown Crockett, ACCUSES Musk is America, Elon 2028. Pam Bondi tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just incited chaos. She should be removed from office immediately." Conservative talk shows replayed the clip on loop, cutting out context and inserting fear. Jasmine's inbox was flooded with threats. Her staff received emails laced with racist slurs and promises of violence. But she didn't delete the live stream. She didn't apologize. Because the moment wasn't about Elon Musk. It was about who gets to speak without being silenced, who gets to dissent without being dismantled. And now, with the full weight of the right-wing machine aimed at her, Jasmine Crockett stood on the fault line between democracy and domination and refused to move. But while Jasmine Crockett stood firm in the fire, somewhere in Florida, a storm had already begun to swirl, one led not by mobs or trolls, but by a polished former attorney general with a mission and a camera crew. The air in the Fox News studio that evening wasn't just cold, it was calculated. Cameras adjusted focus not on facts, but on fury. Pam Bondi entered stage left like a prosecutor arriving late to a rigged trial. Perfect hair, polished tone, and a folder she never opened because she didn't need evidence to deliver a verdict. Her eyes gleamed beneath the soft lights, not with justice, but with ambition disguised as patriotism. Sitting across from the anchor, she took one breath and began, not with nuance, but with accusation. What Jasmine Crockett said was not speech, it was sedition. Plain and simple. The host leaned forward as if feeding off the charge. On screen, the chyron read in bold white caps, "Crockett calls for attack on Musk. Bondi demands action." Then came the quiet part said out loud. "If federal law enforcement won't investigate this radical rhetoric," Bondi warned, "I will call for congressional hearings and push for a federal probe. No one is above the law, not even a congresswoman playing revolutionary." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, But her message was a hammer, swinging not just at Jasmine's words, but at the legitimacy of her platform, her voice, and her right to dissent. It was the oldest political trick in the book. Take a black woman who refuses to bow, reframe her passion as danger, and then wrap your reaction in the language of law and order. Across the country, millions watched as Bondi framed Jasmine not as a critic of corruption, but as a walking national security risk. Her calm delivery only made it more insidious, because she didn't yell, she didn't rage. She weaponized poise. And in doing so, she gave every viewer permission to distrust Jasmine, to see her as unstable, un-American, unfit. It wasn't just political spin, it was erasure, elegant, televised, and dripping in the false morality of protecting the nation. What made it worse, what made it feel like betrayal carved into marble, was that Bondi knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about keeping America safe. It was about silencing a woman who had dared to call out a billionaire. Bondi wasn't calling for justice. She was calling for control. Control over the narrative, over the backlash, over the consequences of a nation being forced to confront its addiction to corporate gods in tech robes. It began as a brief news alert no one expected to matter. 3 suspects arrested in vandalism incident at Tesla charging station. But by dawn, it had detonated into a media firestorm with Jasmine Crockett's name written all over it. At precisely 3:27 a.m., surveillance footage from a supercharger hub outside Colorado Springs showed 3 men, white hoodies, bandanas, and backpacks, rushing toward the charging units. Their movements were clumsy, angry, impulsive. They didn't shout slogans. They didn't chant. They just swung metal pipes like sledgehammers, doused cables in gasoline, and torched the site before sprinting back into the darkness. It took police under 2 hours to track them. By sunrise, they were cuffed, processed, and plastered across every news site in America. But the moment they were booked, the story stopped being about them. Pam Bondi seized the moment like it had been delivered on cue. She appeared outside a courthouse in Florida with a stack of printed screenshots from Jasmine Crockett's livestream, like evidence in a trial that hadn't even started. Holding one up for the press to see, she didn't hesitate. When a sitting member of Congress says she wants Elon Musk taken down, Bondi declared, we shouldn't be surprised when his infrastructure is attacked. Actions like these begin with words like hers. Her voice was calm, her delivery sharp, but the impact hit like a wrecking ball through truth itself. She hadn't just connected dots. She'd drawn a noose between them. The suspects were anonymous. Jasmine was not. And now the crime had a face, a target, a symbol. The injustice was staggering. Jasmine hadn't incited violence. Her words were direct, yes, but rooted in accountability, not destruction. She had called for political pushback, not gasoline and steel. But the narrative had already slipped from her hands. TV anchors replayed Bondi's soundbite every half hour. Websites pushed headlines like, Congresswoman's rhetoric sparks Tesla attacks, with no qualifying statements, no context, just implication baked into every word. In less than 12 hours, Jasmine had gone from a critic of unchecked power to the unofficial godmother of property crime. No one cared about the suspect's motives, backgrounds, or mental state. That would take work. Framing Crockett was easier, cleaner, more valuable. At her D.C. office, Jasmine sat frozen in front of the screen, watching her own face fade in and out of breaking news banners. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. The system hadn't just misheard her, it had chosen to weaponize her, chosen to pretend that righteous anger was an act of war, chosen to act as if a black woman speaking hard truth on her birthday had triggered a national threat. And as talking heads argued over whether she had crossed the line, none of them asked the question that burned in her gut. Who drew the line in the first place? But in a country where perception weighs more than proof, the real trial didn't happen in courtrooms or hearings. It happened on screens, where media giants loaded their cannons and took sides in a war Jasmine never asked for. By noon, the battle lines were drawn, not with policy, but with headlines. CNN opened with an impassioned segment titled Weaponizing Words, The Danger of Misreading Protest. Jasmine's face filled the screen, framed in calm blues, her voice layered over with commentary defending her right to dissent. Legal analysts argued that the First Amendment was under attack, not from Jasmine, but from those trying to criminalize criticism. Her livestream clip played in full, uninterrupted, for the first time since the controversy erupted, showing her exact words and tone. Firm, yes, but far from incendiary. The anchor closed with a quote from Frederick Douglass and a question that hung in the air like a warning. If truth sounds like fire, maybe it's because the house is already burning. Across millions of homes, Jasmine's supporters exhaled, briefly, because just one channel over, a different picture was being painted with blood-red brushstrokes. Breitbart's homepage screamed, "Radical Democrat incites Tesla attacks, Musk in the crosshairs." Below it, a montage showed split-second flashes of fire, broken chargers, and Jasmine Crockett's face frozen mid-sentence, edited to look like a threat in motion. The article didn't bother with nuance. It labeled her a rising star of leftist extremism, accused her of encouraging class warfare, and called her a soft-spoken revolutionary hiding behind polished grammar. A guest columnist even suggested Crockett's seat in Congress be suspended pending investigation. On air, a panelist snarled, "We wouldn't tolerate this kind of speech if it came from overseas. Why are we tolerating it from within our own government?" No one pushed back. No one mentioned her call for peace. In that version of the story, Jasmine wasn't a woman. She was a symbol, and symbols, once vilified, rarely get humanized again. For Jasmine, watching the split-screen chaos was like watching two versions of herself fight for survival. One was principled, defiant, and painfully human. The other was manufactured, distorted, and dangerous, because it had been built to make people fear her, not understand her. She realized then that she wasn't just up against Bondi or Musk or right-wing influencers. She was up against the machine, the algorithm-fed echo chamber that didn't need her truth, only her silhouette to fill their villain quota. And in a media war where rage equals ratings, her integrity was now a threat, not to democracy, but to their narrative. But narratives spun in studios eventually demand something harder than sound bites. Sworn testimony, under oath, beneath the cold gaze of Congress and the unforgiving eye of history. The summons came at 6:42 a.m., hand-delivered, sealed with the insignia of the House Oversight Committee, and marked urgent. Jasmine Crockett held it in her hands like a grenade waiting to go off. The message was clear. You've rattled the wrong pillars of power. Now step inside and answer for it. Within hours, the media had the scoop. Congress to launch emergency hearing on political speech and civil unrest. The headline sounded neutral, even fair, but Jasmine knew better. This wasn't about balance. It was a trap, one carefully staged to pit her against an opponent as calculating as the system itself. The hearing was set for Thursday, 10 a.m., Rayburn Building, room 2175. She wouldn't face a jury. She'd face something colder, a committee designed to look like justice, but built to protect everything she had threatened to expose. And waiting on the other side of the room, already booked, already mic'd, was Pam Bondi. They entered from opposite ends of the corridor, like characters from rival timelines. Jasmine Crockett, civil rights attorney, daughter of Dallas Grit, dressed in dark navy with her signature lapel cross, walked like she'd survived this trial long before it ever convened. Pam Bondi, blonde, polished, practiced, the former Attorney General of Florida, stepped in like she owned the walls. One had made her name defending people who couldn't afford justice. The other had built hers defending systems that denied it. The contrast wasn't just visual. It was ideological, generational, even spiritual. Crockett represented a rising coalition that believed truth should confront power. Bondi represented an old guard that believed power was truth. And now, seated at opposite tables beneath the seal of the United States Congress, they didn't just represent themselves. They represented the fracture line of a nation deciding who gets to speak and who gets silenced. The room was full but felt frozen. Lawyers shifting papers, aides murmuring into headsets, photographers moving like ghosts. But all of it was background noise to the two women at the center of the storm. Jasmine Crockett sat tall, her face unreadable, every inch of her posture trained not to flinch. Pam Bondi, stone-faced, scanned the room with a prosecutor's precision, pausing only when her eyes locked with Jasmine's. The moment held. No blink, no nod. Just the electric stillness of two forces who had come too far to back down now. Cameras clicked, capturing what would become the image of the day. Two women, one stare, and a silence louder than any opening statement. Then the gavel dropped. "This hearing will come to order," the chairman declared, but the order was already an illusion. Because what was about to unfold wasn't just oversight, it was a showdown dressed in legal robes, and neither side had come to lose. There are moments in political hearings where everything changes, not because of truth, but because someone decides to throw a match. Pam Bondi didn't hesitate. She leaned into the microphone with the poise of someone who'd rehearsed every word in front of a mirror, not to reflect the truth, but to craft a weapon. Her voice was cool, practiced, absent of tremor. "Let me say this for the record," she began, her eyes scanning the committee, then locking with Jasmine like a hawk circling prey. "When you say take him down on a live stream watched by millions, you don't get to play innocent when violence follows." Her fingers tapped a printed still of Jasmine's speech, enlarged for theatrical effect. "You knew what those words would do. You knew what kind of people were listening, and you chose to speak anyway." She straightened the papers as if reordering a case file. "You called it symbolic. You called it peaceful. But the fact is, someone took your words and turned them into destruction. And now there are broken stations, burning wires, and 3 young men behind bars because they believed you were calling them to action." Her gaze narrowed. "Intent doesn't erase consequence, Congresswoman." The words weren't shouted, but they cut like they had been. "If we're going to hold people accountable for inciting violence, let's not pretend the rules change depending on who holds the microphone." She paused, letting the weight of her accusation settle like a fog. "This isn't political speech. It's recklessness wrapped in rhetoric." There was no gavel strike, no interruption, just the sound of cameras clicking, journalists scribbling, and 1,000 assumptions hardening into headlines. And for the briefest second, Bondi allowed herself the faintest curve of a smile, cold, contained, and designed for headlines. Jasmine didn't react right away, not with a shake of her head, not with a scoff. She simply sat in that silence, sat with the weight of Bondi's accusation, the whispers behind it, the political theater thick in the air, and let it land. Her stillness wasn't surrender, it was control. Then she leaned forward slowly, deliberately, as if pushing back against a tide. And when she spoke, her voice was clear, not loud, not trembling, but firm with the weight of every injustice she had ever watched be ignored. "No," she said, and the word didn't echo. It sank. "You want to talk about incitement? Let's talk about silence." The room held still. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need them. "When men stormed our Capitol, armed, violent, screaming about blood and hanging officials, you didn't say their words lit anything. You called it passion. You called it frustration. You asked for understanding." Her eyes never left Bondi. "You didn't demand investigations. You demanded leniency. You stood behind cameras and softened the edges of hate, gave it room to breathe." Her hands rested flat on the table, like anchors holding her steady. "So don't lecture me about responsibility. I used my words to call out a man who wields power like a weapon. You used yours to shield people who turned the seat of our democracy into a war zone." She leaned in just an inch closer. "I didn't set the fire. I'm standing in it because your silence let it spread. And now you want to call me dangerous for refusing to burn quietly." Her final words weren't yelled. They were delivered with the calm of someone who had tasted fire before and decided not to run. "Silence is not neutral, Pam. It's complicity dressed in pearls." Time didn't stop, but it felt like it wanted to. The moment Jasmine finished, something unspoken shifted in the room. It wasn't just tension, it was revelation, the kind that peels back every layer of politics and leaves nothing but the raw question: who are we really, when the lights come on and the lies get stripped away? Every seat in that chamber, every corner of that room felt suspended. No one moved. No one exhaled. Even the cameras, usually restless and twitching, stood motionless, as if afraid that capturing the moment might shatter it. Pam Bondi didn't blink, but her body language cracked in microscopic ways. Shoulders tightening, hands tightening their grip around the statement in front of her. For a woman known for being unshakable on live television, she looked for the first time cornered. Jasmine, by contrast, didn't move at all. She didn't smirk, didn't revel in the silence she had created. She simply held the stillness with the same grace she'd held the storm. One of the younger members of the committee leaned back in his chair, visibly stunned. Another whispered to an aide without breaking eye contact with Jasmine. And across the press balcony, a reporter mouthed something to their editor, no doubt trying to put into words what had just happened, and knowing they never really could. This wasn't just a political response. It was a moral reckoning, and the entire room, for the briefest, most electric moment, forgot to breathe. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to this hearing unarmed. She came prepared for war, and her next move wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a bomb she'd been waiting to drop. Jasmine didn't slam her fist on the table. She didn't raise her voice. What she did was far more dangerous. She made the room remember. With slow, deliberate motion, she reached for the remote on the table beside her notes and held it in her palm like it was a detonator. "With your permission, Madam Chair," she said coolly, "I'd like to introduce a public statement made by Ms. Bondi on January 7th, 2021, less than 24 hours after the attack on the United States Capitol." No one objected. The chair gave a quiet nod, and then the screen behind the panel lit up, not with charts, not with maps, but with truth caught on camera. The video was old but unmistakable. It showed Pam Bondi at a press conference outside a government building, framed by American flags, her voice calm, her message stunning. "These were not terrorists," the clip began. "These were Americans, passionate and scared, who deserve to be heard, not punished." A timestamp in the corner marked the date, January 7th, 2021. The camera in the committee room zoomed in as Bondi's recorded voice continued. "We must avoid political overreach. We must listen. We must not allow partisanship to criminalize constitutional emotion." Then the screen went black. Silence followed. Not polite silence, not procedural silence, but shock. The kind of silence that crawls down the back of your neck and makes the walls lean in to listen. Jasmine sat still for a moment, then placed the remote on the table with precision, as if she were dropping a piece of evidence into a sealed file. "That," she said clearly, "is what Ms. Bondi said about people who smashed windows, carried zip ties, chanted for executions, and desecrated this nation's capital. That warranted understanding. But when I criticized a billionaire's influence in government, suddenly that's incitement to violence?" She didn't blink. "If you can defend the people who brought gallows to the Capitol steps, but call my words dangerous, then this hearing isn't about safety. It's about silencing the wrong kind of voice." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word she spoke hit with the force of truth wrapped in restraint. Bondi shifted in her seat but said nothing. She didn't have to. The room already knew what it had just witnessed. A narrative collapse. Not a mic drop, but a memory restored. Bondi may have flinched, but she didn't fold. She was a courtroom tactician, and Jasmine's blow, while surgical, had activated the fallback plan. She reached for a leather-bound folder and opened it with the care of someone preparing an autopsy. "If I may respond," she said, her voice a little sharper now, the smoothness cracking beneath the pressure. "While Congresswoman Crockett is focused on rhetoric, I'm focused on results. And unfortunately, the results have been violent." She stood, lifting a set of printed charts and placing them before the committee like exhibits at a trial. "These are official incident reports compiled by the FBI and local law enforcement." She handed copies to each member. "In the 48 hours following Congresswoman Crockett's livestream, 7 Tesla facilities across Colorado, Texas, and Nevada were attacked. 2 resulted in injury. 1 involved explosives. This," she said, tapping the chart, "isn't a coincidence. It's a chain reaction." A large digital monitor behind her now showed color-coded markers: orange for fire, red for vandalism, and black for under federal investigation. It looked like a war map. Her speech, her timing, and her following cannot be divorced from these acts. Public officials have a responsibility to temper words with wisdom. She turned toward Jasmine now. You don't need to yell, "Burn it down," to be responsible for the match. You only need to whisper to the wrong room. Her delivery was icy, almost rehearsed. Congresswoman Crockett told millions that someone needed to be taken down. Now we're counting the cost. She paused and looked directly at the cameras. Leadership is not about lighting fires. It's about preventing them. And if we don't call this out now, then the next explosion won't be at a charging station. It'll be at the foundation of this democracy. It was a dramatic turn, and Bondi knew it. But for all the charts and warnings, something in the room had shifted. People were listening, yes, but they were also comparing. One woman had played a video of empathy toward insurrectionists. The other had called out influence, and somehow only one of them was being labeled dangerous. Just as the hearing appeared to be settling into its familiar back and forth, attack, defend, deflect. Jasmine's counsel passed her a note. She read it, nodded once, and addressed the chair. Madam Chair, I have received permission to introduce a final witness. He's requested anonymity from the public record, but he's here voluntarily and under whistleblower protections. The room stirred. Cameras refocused. Journalists perked up. A man stepped through the side door of the chamber, flanked by two legal observers. He looked ordinary, late 30s, gray slacks, navy jacket. But as he sat down and gave his name for the record, jaws began to tighten. My name is Gavin Doyle, he said, voice steady. I'm a former senior automation engineer at Tesla's Nevada Gigafactory. Every head turned, Bondi's eyes narrowed. He placed a small flash drive on the table. I'm here because what this hearing is discussing barely scratches the surface of what's really going on inside Tesla. In the next 9 minutes, Gavin dismantled the facade. He described company-wide NDAS signed under threat of termination, described workers terminated for reporting safety violations and political donations made under false names. What Ms. Crockett called out wasn't chaos. It was the first light inside a building full of locked doors, he said. I have emails, internal documents, audio recordings. Some of those attacks, they weren't inspired by her. They were attempts to hide what we knew was coming. He looked directly at the committee. Jasmine Crockett didn't provoke a mob. She provoked a reaction from a machine that's been silencing its own workers for years. The room wasn't just silent, it was stunned. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't in anyone's talking points. Bondi sat frozen, no binder, no chart, no line prepared, because the narrative she had crafted just met a man who had lived inside the lie. And now it was all beginning to unravel. But as the hearing room simmered with revelations too raw to control, the real battlefield was already shifting, no longer confined to wood-paneled chambers, but spilling into millions of feeds, phones, and fractured digital tribes across the country. Within hours, the internet became a war zone. The moment Gavin Doyle's testimony ended, America's collective screen caught fire. Not with nuance, but with hashtags. On one side, a tidal wave of support surged under the banner, Let Jasmine Speak, a cry from citizens who saw in her a woman standing unflinching in front of a machine built to break people like her. The hashtag exploded across platforms. Instagram stories with fire emojis, Twitter threads dissecting her composure, Reddit posts calling her the modern-day truth-teller in a chamber of ghosts. Videos of her stare-down with Bondi were remixed over protest music, church choirs, even courtroom drama scores. They went viral not because they were edited, but because they didn't need to be. But on the other side of the digital trench, a colder, calculated narrative took hold. Stop Crockett now began trending, first among fringe accounts, then on the mainline networks. Conservative influencers took Bondi's sound bites and weaponized them into memes, slogans, and furious TikTok rants. Some labeled Jasmine a domestic radical. Others, worse, suggested she was disrespecting the Constitution and emboldening anarchists with a law degree. Her speeches were taken out of context and layered over footage of chaos, sirens, and old riots she had nothing to do with. Each side grew louder, more hostile, and less willing to blink. It wasn't just political. It was personal. People weren't arguing policies. They were arguing truth. And in that digital noise, Jasmine's identity, black, female, fierce, was no longer a background fact. It became the very reason she was being either elevated or eviscerated. To one half of the country, she was the voice they'd been waiting for. To the other, she was a threat they were told to fear. The lines had been drawn not in logic, but in emotion. And once again, the algorithm had chosen chaos over clarity. The video dropped at 11:38 p.m., a minute-long clip posted on TikTok by an account with a Confederate flag in its bio and 1 million followers hanging on every word. The title was incendiary. Crockett admits she wants violence. It opened with Jasmine's face carefully cropped and color adjusted to look colder, more threatening. The audio was chopped, stitched, and digitally distorted to make her say something she never had. It's time we take them down by any means necessary. There was no disclaimer, no context, just a ticking clock, dramatic music, and a caption that read, "This is who Democrats are now." It went viral in under 3 hours. Fox News ran it on a loop, framing it as shocking new evidence of extremism. Conservative politicians retweeted it with captions like, "Unacceptable from anyone, especially a congresswoman." By sunrise, it had been viewed over 20 million times. Jasmine's office issued a formal statement denouncing the clip as a fabrication, but it didn't matter. The video had already taken root in the minds of people who didn't want facts. They wanted fuel. The worst part, it worked. Sponsors pulled out of events where Jasmine was scheduled to speak. A high school in Georgia canceled her guest lecture, citing safety concerns. Her team's inbox overflowed with threats, some graphic, some coded, all violent. "You'll get yours. One match at a time, lady. Texas is watching you." The media outrage didn't slow the video. It amplified it. Every time someone tried to explain the truth, the algorithm rewarded the lie. Talk shows debated her tone. Panelists dissected her wardrobe. And in the middle of it all, the woman who had never once called for violence was now fighting to prove she wasn't the very thing they were trying to make her become. Not a politician, not a radical, just a human being refusing to be erased. Jasmine could have gone silent. She could have disappeared behind lawyers, let statements speak for her, let others fight the distortion. That's what her advisors wanted. That's what the system expected. But Jasmine Crockett didn't become Jasmine Crockett by asking permission to exist. So she went live. At 7:01 p.m. the next evening, the live stream began. Not with music, not with an intro video, but with her face. Bare, serious, framed in the kind of light you don't buy, you earn through years of standing under it. "I wasn't going to do this," she began, her voice clear, steady. No makeup artist, no teleprompter. But when lies are shouted and truth is whispered, sometimes you have to pick up the mic yourself. The comments scrolled like floodwater, thousands pouring in every second, some hateful, some heartbroken, many just listening. "Let me be clear," she said, leaning forward, her eyes locked on the lens like it was a witness. "I didn't tell anyone to commit violence. I didn't condone it. I never have. I never will." Her voice dropped slightly. "But I also won't apologize for telling the truth." She clicked a button and played the original, unedited clip from her Tesla takedown stream. "This is what I said," she told the viewers. "This is what they twisted. They cut it, spliced it, and tried to turn a demand for accountability into a declaration of war." She paused, the weight of it all hanging in the room. "If that's the new standard, if telling the truth is now dangerous, then I guess I've always been dangerous." She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply existed, whole, unafraid, and unwilling to shrink. And for the millions watching, it was like seeing sunlight cut through smoke. This isn't about one company. This isn't even about me. This is about what happens when you tell the truth in a system that profits from silence. She let the words settle. "I will not be silent." By the time the stream ended, it had reached 3.2 million viewers and counting. Celebrities shared it. Civil rights groups reposted it. Young organizers in high schools and colleges across the country clipped her closing line, "I will not be silent," and made it their rallying cry. But most importantly, she had reclaimed her voice, not as a politician, not as a headline, but as a person refusing to let the truth drown beneath a tide of fear. But as Jasmine's voice echoed across a fractured country, raw, unfiltered, and defiant, Pam Bondi wasn't retreating. She was reloading, preparing to turn public perception into federal prosecution. It came with chilling precision, like a gavel striking not for order, but for blood. Pam Bondi stood once more before the committee, posture tight, voice honed to a blade. But this time, she wasn't arguing. She was demanding. Based on the pattern of speech, influence, and resulting action, she said, I am formally recommending that this committee refer Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett to the Department of Justice for investigation under 18 U.S. Code Section 2385, advocating the overthrow of the government or inciting ideologically motivated unrest. The room gasped, not whispered shock, audible, sharp, real. She held up another packet, dozens of pages thick, printed with timestamps and social media metrics. This is not political disagreement. This is ideological provocation with real-world consequences. When you repeatedly speak in terms of taking down institutions, when you inspire targeted property attacks, and when you refuse to distance yourself from the consequences, it crosses a line. That line isn't rhetorical, it's criminal. Her voice hardened. We are not talking about protected speech. We are talking about a direct assault on the rule of law, dressed up in activism. She stared straight ahead, eyes glassy with fury. This is sedition wrapped in silk. The room tensed like it was waiting for a punch. But it wasn't just tension, it was fear. Because federal charges didn't mean just headlines or bad optics. They meant possible prison. They meant legacy-ending destruction. Bondi had just fired a shot loud enough for every woman in politics to hear. Speak too boldly, and we will redefine you as a threat to the Republic. The silence after Bondi's words wasn't respectful. It was electric, taut like a wire that could snap with the wrong breath. All eyes turned to Jasmine, but she didn't flinch. She didn't ask to respond. She simply did. She leaned forward, hands clasped together, no papers, no notes, just the full weight of her lived experience pressing down behind her eyes. Her voice came low, but clear. Let me ask this committee one question, she said. When power protects the wealthy and punishes those who speak the truth, who is the real criminal in this room? You could hear the heartbeats in that silence. No one interrupted. No one dared. She stood slowly, unfolding from her chair like a rising tide. I did not break a law. I exposed a system that has never followed its own, and for that I'm being told I'm dangerous. Her gaze swept the room. I didn't storm a Capitol. I didn't light a fire. I didn't hide documents or lie under oath. I spoke to the people. I named the rot. And now you want to put my name next to sedition? She shook her head, not with anger, but disbelief. Is that where we are? Where questioning wealth, tech, and unchecked influence makes you a criminal? Where defending workers makes you an enemy of the state? She took one step forward. Then let the cameras roll. Because if that's your definition of criminal, I hope the jails are ready, because there are millions of us coming. The room didn't erupt, it froze. Every person, Republican, Democrat, press, staffer, felt it. The tectonic shift of one woman not asking for justice, but challenging the entire definition of it. And then, something no one expected happened. A Republican congressman, gray-haired, square-jawed, a veteran of 5 terms, cleared his throat and leaned toward his microphone. Madam Chair, he said, voice low but firm, I need to speak. His name was Representative Alan Whitmore from Ohio's 6th District, known for voting party line, known for staying silent in storms like this. Not today. I've served this body for over a decade, he began. I've seen witnesses lie. I've seen corruption buried under legal tape and fancy speeches. But I've also seen the truth, and I know what courage looks like when it walks into this room. He turned to Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett didn't incite violence. She incited questions, hard questions. And we're not here because she's dangerous. We're here because she's inconvenient. Gasps whispered through the chamber like sparks on dry grass. Whitmore continued, ignoring his colleagues shifting in their seats. I may not agree with everything she says, but I know the difference between protest and provocation, between accountability and anarchy. What I've heard today, especially from the whistleblower, concerns me deeply, and I will not be part of a charade that punishes a colleague for telling the truth too effectively. He closed his folder, sat back, and looked at Bondi, not with anger, but with disappointment. This hearing is supposed to be about justice. If we let it become a weapon, we're not defending democracy, we're destroying it from within. The room broke into murmurs. Even the most seasoned committee members couldn't mask their discomfort. One domino had moved, and everyone could feel it. Something had cracked, not wide, not yet, but enough to let air in. Enough to let doubt grow where there had only been scripted certainty. The system was shifting, and Jasmine Crockett, standing in the eye of it all, didn't need to say another word. She had just won a war by asking a single impossible question. But even as Jasmine's words cracked the walls of silence and one Republican broke ranks, the machinery of power wasn't done. It doesn't retreat. It reshapes, recalculates, and waits to strike from a new angle. 3 days later, the decision came down, not with fanfare, but in the form of a 23-page report released quietly at 7 a.m. It didn't come with headlines or sirens, but it landed like a thunderclap in every office where power thought it could go unchallenged. The House Oversight Committee, after emergency deliberation, issued a formal statement. There is no sufficient legal basis to pursue criminal prosecution against Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The wording was clinical, but the meaning was clear. The accusations of sedition had collapsed under the weight of facts. The report cited First Amendment protections, reviewed the timeline of events, and concluded that Crockett's speech, though provocative, fell well within the constitutional protections afforded to elected officials expressing public concern. It even referenced Supreme Court precedent, quoting Brandenburg v. Ohio, affirming that speech advocating political change is protected unless it incites imminent lawless action. A standard Bondi's claims failed to meet. The ruling was a victory, but it wasn't triumphant. It was delivered with the cautious restraint of a system still uncomfortable admitting when it had gone too far. Jasmine's name had been cleared on paper, but in the court of public perception, the scars remained. Her office issued a brief statement. "We welcome the committee's decision, but we remain vigilant. Truth-telling is not a crime. Silencing dissent is." The line spread fast, shared under hashtags, quoted in op-eds, printed on T-shirts by activists across the country. But even as allies celebrated, Jasmine knew this wasn't over. The chamber had ruled. But Bondi wasn't finished. Because for some, when the law doesn't go far enough, they don't walk away. They go to war, civilian style. Pam Bondi re-emerged just 2 hours after the committee's report hit the press. Not in the Capitol, not before Congress, but in front of a row of cameras outside the U.S. District Court in Tallahassee, standing at a podium stamped with the seal of the state bar. "If Congress will not act," she said, her voice as composed as ever, "then the people will." In one sharp motion, she held up a thick, stapled document. "Today I am filing a civil defamation lawsuit against Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for malicious and reckless falsehoods that have permanently damaged my professional and personal reputation." The media reaction was instantaneous. The lawsuit accused Jasmine of knowingly misrepresenting facts, slandering Ms. Bondi's intent regarding the January 6th insurrection, and unlawfully interfering with Bondi's ability to practice law and participate in public life. It demanded $10 million in damages and an official retraction of Jasmine's live stream and all related public statements. But beneath the legal jargon, the message was unmistakable. "If I can't shut you up in Congress, I'll drag you through every courtroom I can find." Bondi's strategy was ruthless and deliberate. She wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to drown Jasmine in legal fatigue, in headlines, in litigation procedures that could take months or years to resolve. "This is bigger than free speech," Bondi told reporters. "This is about consequences. We are setting a precedent. People don't get to destroy others' reputations and walk away." But the irony hung in the air like static. The woman who defended insurrectionists was now claiming to be the victim of speech. It wasn't justice she was after. It was vengeance in a tailored blazer. Jasmine didn't flinch. 2 days later, her legal team held a press conference of their own. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't theatrical, but it had weight. Jasmine stood beside her lead counsel, a respected First Amendment litigator from D.C., and read the first lines of her counterclaim herself. "Today," she said, "we are filing a civil suit in response to Ms. Bondi's ongoing campaign of defamation, targeted harassment, and unconstitutional retaliation against my protected speech as a public servant." The countersuit was brutal in its clarity. It alleged that Bondi's lawsuit was not just meritless, but part of a deliberate attempt to weaponize the legal system to silence political dissent. Jasmine's team introduced evidence of coordinated media messaging, screenshots of private group messages between Bondi allies discussing financially draining Jasmine's team, and internal communications showing intent to smear her into retreat. The suit also cited violation of federal protections on public speech, obstruction of government function, and intentional emotional distress. But the most powerful moment wasn't the document, it was Jasmine's words. She stepped forward and looked into the crowd, not at the cameras, but through them. "Let me be clear, I will not be sued into silence. This is bigger than me. If we let power go unchecked, if we allow people with deep pockets and old grudges to bully the truth out of existence, then we've already lost more than this case. We've lost the Constitution itself." The words went viral within hours. By evening, legal experts were already calling the clash the most high-profile civil showdown between two former prosecutors in modern political history. Think pieces ran with titles like "The Battle of the Blazers" and "Free Speech on Trial." But for Jasmine, this wasn't about spectacle. This was about drawing a line that said Black women in power do not have to sit quietly while their name is dragged through the mud by the very institutions they once swore to uphold. Two lawyers, two women, two legal philosophies, and now two open cases set to collide in federal court. The political arena had failed to cage the truth, but the courtroom, that would become the final battlefield. And so, with lawsuits filed and battle lines drawn, the courtroom replaced the Capitol as America's new theater of truth. A national spotlight now fixed on two women, two ideologies, and one burning question. Can justice survive a war of reputations? From the moment opening statements began, the case of Bondi versus Crockett transformed from a civil dispute into a national obsession. Cable news stations cleared entire blocks of programming to cover it live. Podcasts labeled it the trial of the century. TikTokers reenacted the exchanges with courtroom-style dramatics, while editorial pages debated everything from the First Amendment to the weaponization of gender in public discourse. It wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a cultural earthquake. The New York Times ran a front-page headline comparing it to O.J. Simpson meets political whistleblowing. And every day the courtroom doors opened, the world watched, holding its breath as Jasmine Crockett faced the full force of the machine that once tried to erase her. Inside the federal courtroom, the tension was so thick you could feel it under your skin. Jasmine sat with her attorneys, dressed in black, a small silver pin of the Constitution on her lapel. Her presence was silent strength, never rattled, never retreating. Across from her, Bondi was poised, aggressive, flanked by a high-powered litigation team hired from one of the most expensive firms in Florida. The tone was combative from the first hour. Bondi's team painted Jasmine as a reckless agitator who blurred the line between political critique and dangerous provocation. But Jasmine's lawyers were ready. They responded with documents, timelines, and whistleblower depositions that ripped apart the narrative Bondi had spent months constructing. And yet, the hardest part wasn't in the legal arguments. It was in the stares, the insinuations, the unspoken power dynamics that pulse beneath every objection. The court of law was supposed to be neutral, but every glance at Jasmine carried the question no one dared say aloud. How dare she not back down? The world wasn't watching justice. It was watching a system squirm. It was day 10 when the trial's axis tilted. Under cross-examination, Jasmine's lead counsel introduced new evidence. A trail of financial records linking Pam Bondi to a political action committee, new horizons for innovation, which had funneled over $4.2 million into public campaigns defending Elon Musk and Tesla's deregulation agenda. When asked if Bondi had received direct speaking fees or legal retainers from organizations affiliated with the past, her answer wavered. I've done advocacy work, yes, but I wouldn't characterize it as financial dependency, she said. But Jasmine's team wasn't bluffing. They produced invoices, emails, and a previously unreleased transcript of a Zoom call where Bondi had stated, "We need to make sure Tesla doesn't get gutted by these progressive lawsuits. Our job is to control the narrative before the media eats us alive." The courtroom fell silent. Even Bondi's attorneys seemed caught off guard. The judge called for a 10-minute recess. But by then, the story was already out. Within hours, MSNBC, CNN, and even center-right outlets were running the headline, "Breaking, Bondi tied to Tesla-funded PS undisclosed payments raise legal ethics questions." The backlash was volcanic. Legal ethicists called for an investigation into potential conflicts of interest. The Florida Bar Association issued a public statement confirming a review of Bondi's financial disclosures. Protesters lined the courthouse the next morning, holding signs that read, "Bought by Musk, branded by lies." For the first time, the narrative flipped. Bondi wasn't the prosecutor. She was the defendant of her own reputation. And Jasmine? She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was now the loudest voice in the room. The verdict came 2 weeks later, clear, firm, unanimous, in favor of Jasmine Crockett. The court ruled that Bondi's original lawsuit was baseless and that her actions constituted a coordinated attempt to intimidate a sitting member of Congress through misuse of the civil legal system. Damages were awarded to Jasmine, $1.3 million for reputational harm, $500,000 in legal fees. But she didn't smile. She didn't cheer. There was no raised fist, no champagne, just a long exhale, like a woman walking away from a battlefield littered with wreckage. Because it wasn't over. Jasmine exited the courthouse through a back entrance, flanked by security, not because of protocol, but because of death threats. Her email had been flooded with graphic messages. Her staff had received anonymous calls warning them to keep her quiet or we will. A white envelope with no return address had been hand-delivered to her district office. Inside was a single line typed on scrap paper. "Not everyone gets a second trial." The threats were being investigated. The FBI was involved, but the damage was done. Media crews surrounded her car, hoping for a quote. Instead, she paused for one sentence. "We won the case, but I haven't seen justice. Not yet." Then she stepped inside, not as a victor, but as a survivor. That night, major networks ran retrospectives titled "The Crockett-Bondi Showdown: How Free Speech Went to War." But none of them captured the truth. Not really, because for Jasmine, this wasn't about a verdict. It was about the cost, the sleepless nights, the fear etched into her team's faces, the moments when she asked herself, was speaking the truth worth this much pain? And every time the answer was still yes, but not without scars. But even as the courtroom emptied and the ink dried on victory papers, Jasmine knew something far deeper still lingered. Because the system hadn't lost, it had simply recoiled. And its face returned, smiling, on national television. 3 days after her legal defeat, Pam Bondi sat across from a primetime news anchor on one of America's largest conservative platforms, the soft glow of studio lights erasing the cracks of courtroom loss. Her posture was unshaken, her blazer immaculate, and her tone carefully modulated, not one of apology, but of clarity sharpened by defiance. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, with that signature tight smile. "I regret nothing." She leaned forward, slow, practiced. "I stood for order, for law, for restraint. If we've reached the point where that's considered villainy, then maybe the problem isn't me." The anchor nodded solemnly, as if she were delivering a eulogy for truth itself. Bondi continued, "Congresswoman Crockett may have won in court, but what she unleashed will ripple far beyond this verdict. When officials are allowed to stir public unrest with no consequences, we don't have accountability. We have chaos dressed as progress." Then came the line every strategist watching would later quote in op-eds, "You can't sue away the soul of a nation." That night, Twitter lit up. Some praised her for standing firm. Others condemned her as the emblem of everything broken in American justice. But what no one could deny was this. Pam Bondi wasn't defeated, she was evolving. Behind her smile wasn't just damage control, it was the resurgence of a force determined to reshape the narrative. One that believed law should punish disruption, not protect it. Bondi was no longer just a lawyer. She had become a symbol of the system's refusal to reflect on itself. And for Jasmine Crockett, that meant the real battle had just begun. 1 week later, the world watched as a different stage lit up. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a congressional hearing. It was a stadium sold out shoulder to shoulder with over 60,000 people filling the air with chants, camera lights, and electric expectation. The event was billed simply as the Freedom Reframed Rally, but everyone knew what it really was: Jasmine Crockett's answer. She stepped onto the stage to no music, no theatrics, just thunderous applause and a screen behind her, glowing with the words, "Truth is not a crime." She wore no suit, just a white blouse and jeans, a pin over her heart in the shape of the First Amendment. She stood at the mic, silent for a full 10 seconds, letting the weight of the moment settle across the stadium like fog rolling over steel. Then she began. "Freedom in the digital age," she said, voice resonating like a bell through the loudspeakers, "is no longer about what we can say, it's about what they can erase." The crowd erupted, but she held up a hand. "They told me to apologize. They told me to settle, to be quiet, but I will not apologize for defending the truth. I will not settle for silence while billionaires buy justice. And I will never be quiet in a system that only listens to money." She raised a document in her hand. "This is a new draft resolution, the Citizen Speech Protection Act. It aims to make targeted civil litigation against public dissenters a federal violation. Because when free speech becomes a threat to the powerful, it's not the speaker who's dangerous, it's the system trying to muzzle them." Thunder rolled across the stadium. People wept. Others stood still, hands on hearts, because they weren't just hearing a policy. They were hearing permission to believe again. Not in perfection, not in politics, but in the possibility of a truth that couldn't be sued into silence. And Jasmine stood there, not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as the voice of every silenced whistle, every erased story, every crushed protest that never got airtime. As the sun dipped below the steel rafters of the stadium, Jasmine walked slowly to the edge of the stage. She lowered the mic stand until it was almost beneath her chin. And then she looked out, not just at the people in front of her, but past them, into the lens, into America. And she said, "When speech becomes a crime, silence becomes an accomplice." The words didn't echo. They detonated. For a full 5 seconds, the crowd didn't cheer, didn't move. It was as if the world itself had exhaled. Her voice, firm, measured, had carried a truth too sharp to look away from. Those 13 words weren't just a declaration. They were a mirror held up to a nation pretending not to see its own reflection. Behind her, the screen changed. Her quote lit up across it in bold white, followed by the words, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." Cameras from 32 countries captured it. Translations shot across news tickers in real time. Commentators scrambled to spin it, frame it, weaponize it, but they were too late. Because that night something cracked wide open. And for the first time in years, it wasn't Jasmine Crockett on trial. It was the idea that telling the truth should ever require permission. But as the spotlights dimmed and the stadium emptied, what lingered was not the applause. It was the weight of the war Jasmine had just survived. Not a war of bullets and blood, but of silence, distortion, and institutional betrayal. And it left behind one devastating question. What does it cost to speak the truth when everything around you is built to punish it? Jasmine Crockett's story did not end in celebration. It ended in reckoning. The kind that doesn't come with medals or speeches, but in the quiet after the fire, when a person is left to ask, was it worth it? This wasn't a victory lap. This was survival at full volume. And in her survival lies a lesson our democracy is running out of time to learn. Because what Jasmine endured, character assassination, death threats, legal harassment, defamation disguised as process, isn't rare. It's just visible. And that visibility cuts both ways. It empowers others to speak, but it also shows every powerful institution exactly how to punish someone for refusing to shut up. We like to imagine truth as a torch passed from hand to hand, lighting the way. But Jasmine's story showed something darker, that in this era, truth is often a flare gun, fired in desperation, not to guide others, but to prove you're still alive. Because in the age of weaponized media, AI-driven distortion, and billionaires writing the rules, telling the truth is no longer a moral act. It's a political liability. And those who dare to do it are not seen as patriots. They're labeled as threats, as unstable, as too loud, too angry, too black, too female, too something. Jasmine didn't speak because it was safe. She spoke because silence had already failed her community too many times. She knew the risks. She knew how power reacts when it's called out by someone it doesn't expect to survive the backlash. And still, she stood. Still, she pointed her finger not at a person, but at a system designed to look neutral while bleeding the inconvenient dry. She didn't just name injustice. She named who profits from pretending it doesn't exist. And for that, they came for her with everything they had. The courts were just the final weapon. Before that came the noise, the social media pile-ons, the selective clips stripped of context, the carefully curated outrage meant to incite digital mobs who don't want facts. They want fuel. Bondi's lawsuit wasn't about damages. It was about sending a message to every woman, every dissenter, every voice in America, whoever thought they could speak truth without consequence. It was a warning dressed in legal language. This is what happens when you step out of line. And Jasmine? She heard that warning. She just refused to obey it. And in that refusal, she revealed the true cost of living honestly in a dishonest world. It's not just about threats or headlines. It's about isolation, about staring into the mirror after midnight and asking yourself if the weight of the fight is worth the wreckage it leaves behind. Jasmine didn't walk through fire for fame. She walked through it so the next person might not have to. So the next whistleblower, the next activist, the next girl from South Dallas who gets told her voice is too much, too sharp, too political, might see in Jasmine a reason to speak anyway. But here's the truth most people can't say out loud. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It was built to absorb just enough truth to maintain credibility while expelling every voice that refuses to be polished, controlled, or paid off. Jasmine's trial wasn't just about her versus Bondi. It was about truth versus tolerance. Because in modern America, truth is only tolerated when it's soft, palatable, and powerless. When it's disruptive, when it cuts too close to profit margins or political narratives, that's when it becomes dangerous. That's when it gets criminalized. So what's the lesson? It's not that courage wins. It's that courage survives, barely, and only if we build systems that protect it. Jasmine's fight exposed a terrifying reality, that freedom of speech means nothing without protection from retaliation. You can't praise the First Amendment in theory and prosecute it in practice. You can't celebrate democracy while allowing billion-dollar empires to crush critics in courtrooms built more for intimidation than justice. And you certainly can't claim to defend law and order when the law is weaponized to preserve disorder for everyone but the rich. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.